$15.7 billion gone, written off, wiped from the books in a single announcement on March 12, 2026. 3 electric vehicles, months from rolling off the assembly line at Honda's Ohio factory, canceled. Stock crashed 8% in a single day, and a company that had made money every single year since 1957 posted its first annual loss since a man named Eisenhower was running the United States. Let that sink in. Honda made money for 70 straight years, through oil crises, through recessions, through trade wars, through COVID. Toyota couldn't say that. GM couldn't say that. Ford went bankrupt in 2008. Chrysler went bankrupt twice. Honda just kept making money, quietly, stubbornly, relentlessly, for 7 consecutive decades. And then one decision ended the longest winning streak in automotive history. But here's what makes this story different from every other corporate disaster you've ever watched. Honda didn't lose $15.7 billion because they were incompetent. They didn't lose it because their cars were bad. They didn't lose it because of internal warfare or a CEO who escaped in a speaker box. Honda lost $15.7 billion because they did exactly what every government, every analyst, and every market signal told them to do. And the rules changed after the factory was already built. This is the most unfair story in the history of the automotive industry. And it starts with a man who smelled perfume in engine oil. The man who built an empire from a wooden shack in 1946 in the bombed-out ruins of post-war Japan, a man with a 9th grade education and a face scarred from a racing crash walked into a wooden shack and started bolting surplus military engines onto bicycles. His name was Soichiro Honda. He described the smell of engine oil as perfume. No degree, no factory, no investors. Just a conviction that machines could make ordinary people's lives extraordinary. By 1948, he had incorporated the Honda Motor Company. By 1959, he had built the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. And by the 1980s, he had built something that nobody in Japan or Detroit thought was possible. To understand what Honda lost in 2026, you need to understand what Honda was, because this wasn't just a car company. This was a philosophy wrapped in sheet metal. Soichiro Honda built the company on a principle that no other automaker in the world shared. Racing is how you prove your engineering, and engineering is how you earn the right to sell cars. In 1959, Honda entered the Isle of Man TT motorcycle race, one of the most dangerous motorsport events on Earth, with a team of unknown Japanese riders on untested machines. They finished 6th. By 1961, they won. By the mid-1960s, Honda motorcycles dominated global racing so completely that competitors asked the governing body to change the rules. Then Honda did something nobody expected. He took the racing engineers and told them to build a car. The 1972 Honda Civic arrived in America at exactly the moment the country needed it most. The 1973 oil crisis sent gas prices through the roof, and suddenly, the land of V8 muscle cars was desperate for something that didn't drink fuel like water. The Civic weighed 1,536 pounds, ran a 1.2-liter engine producing 50 horsepower, and got 41 miles per gallon at a time when the average American car got 12. But here's the detail that separates Honda from every other manufacturer on this list. The CVCC engine. In 1970, the US government passed the Clean Air Act, imposing emission standards so strict that every automaker in the world, GM, Ford, Toyota, Volkswagen, declared them physically impossible to meet, every single one. Honda's engineers built the CVCC, Compound Vortex Controlled Combustion, a lean burn engine that passed the emissions test without a catalytic converter. The engine, the entire industry said, was impossible. Honda built it first. Think about that. The motorcycle company, with no automotive experience, out-engineered the entire global car industry on emissions. GM executives called the standards impossible. Ford lobbied against them. Chrysler said the technology didn't exist, and a motorcycle company from Hamamatsu built it in a lab while the giants were busy writing letters to Congress. That moment, the moment Honda solved the problem that Detroit said couldn't be solved, defined everything the company would become for the next 50 years. From that moment, Honda was untouchable. The Accord became the first Japanese car manufactured in America, built in Marysville, Ohio starting in 1982, a decision that was considered insane at the time because no Japanese automaker had ever built a car on American soil. The factory was staffed with American workers trained in Honda's production philosophy, and within 5 years, the Ohio-built Accord was rated higher in quality than many domestically designed American sedans. Honda had proven something that the Big Three in Detroit desperately didn't want proven: that the problem with American cars wasn't American workers, it was American management. In Formula One, Honda engines won 6 consecutive Constructors' Championships between 1986 and 1991, powering Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost to some of the most dominant seasons in racing history. The technology developed in F1 flowed directly into road cars: VTEC, variable valve timing, high-revving, naturally aspirated engines that made power without turbochargers. The NSX, developed with direct input from Senna himself, who drove prototypes at Suzuka and demanded a 50% increase in chassis rigidity, proved a Japanese car could embarrass a Ferrari on a racetrack and then drive to the grocery store without overheating. Senna owned 3 NSXs personally. When the greatest racing driver in history daily drives your car, that's not a marketing endorsement. That's an engineering verdict. The VTEC system revolutionized engine design worldwide. And through all of it, through the 1990s, through the dot-com crash, through 2008, through COVID, Honda never lost money, not once, until they did. The EV bet: how Honda gambled everything on a future that didn't arrive. Here's where the 70-year streak dies. And honestly, this chapter is painful to write, because Honda didn't make a stupid decision. They made a smart decision that the world punished them for. In the early 2020s, every CEO, every analyst, every government official, and every financial talking head on television was screaming the same message: go electric or die. The transition was accelerating, the subsidies were flowing, and any manufacturer that didn't go all in on EVs would be left behind like roadkill. Governments offered tax credits, Wall Street rewarded EV commitments with soaring stock prices. Tesla was valued at more than every legacy automaker combined. The message from every direction, policy, market, media, was clear: electrify or die. Honda listened. In April 2024, the company announced a massive EV offensive: new electric vehicles designed for the American market, a new dedicated EV factory in Ohio, a partnership with General Motors on battery technology, and a planned EV supply chain in Canada. The investment was enormous. Billions allocated for the Ohio EV hub, billions more for battery partnerships, and an entire organizational restructure that redirected thousands of engineers from perfecting combustion engines to learning electric powertrains from scratch. The commitment was total. Honda publicly stated that EVs would account for 20% of sales by 2030, and that by 2040, every Honda sold worldwide would be either electric or hydrogen fuel cell. The company that built the CVCC, the engine that solved emissions without a catalytic converter, was now telling the world it was abandoning internal combustion entirely. That's how confident they were. That's how wrong the timing turned out to be. And then the world changed. And what happened next should make every taxpayer who was promised an EV future genuinely angry. In July 2025, the United States Senate passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, legislation that abruptly eliminated the federal EV tax credit, not phased out over years, not gradually reduced, eliminated, effective. September 30th, 2025. Automakers who had spent billions building EV factories, developing EV platforms, and training EV workforces were given 90 days to adjust to a market that had just lost its single most important demand driver overnight. I need you to really sit with this. Honda and every other automaker spent years and billions preparing for an EV future that the government encouraged, subsidized, and then pulled the rug out from under in 90 days. The government told them to build. They built. Then the government changed its mind, and the bill landed on Honda's desk. You can't unspin a factory, you can't undesign a car, you can't unhire an engineering team, and you definitely can't get back the $15.7 billion you invested in products that the market no longer supports. The $15.7 billion write-down. The day the streak ended on March 12, 2026, Honda announced the number that ended 70 years of unbroken profit, 2.5 trillion yen, approximately $15.7 billion success in write-downs and restructuring charges related to its electric vehicle strategy. 3 EV models that were months from starting production at Honda's Ohio facility were canceled outright. The Canadian EV supply chain investment was postponed indefinitely. The development timeline, the factory tooling, the supplier contracts, the engineering hours, all of it written off. Honda's stock dropped 8% in a single day. The company revised its fiscal year forecast from a projected 550 billion yen profit to a 570 billion yen loss, a swing of over $7 billion in expected outcomes. For the fiscal year ending March 2026, Honda posted a net loss of approximately $3.6 billion, the first annual loss since the company listed on the stock market in 1957. 68 years of continuous profit shattered in one announcement on one Wednesday because of one policy change made by people who have never built a car in their lives. Now here's what makes this genuinely different from the Stellantis or Nissan disasters. Honda didn't lose money because their cars were bad. Honda didn't lose money because their leadership was incompetent. Honda lost money because they made a rational bet on a future that governments around the world encouraged them to build. And then one government changed the rules overnight. CEO Toshihiro Mibe admitted publicly that the loss of US EV credits combined with the emergence of low-cost Chinese EVs made it very difficult for Honda to turn a profit on electric vehicles, and the hits kept coming. US tariffs of 25% on imported vehicles added another $4.4 billion in projected profit impact for fiscal 2026. Honda mitigated roughly $1.4 billion through domestic production shifts, but the net tariff damage still reached approximately $3 billion, on top of the $15.7 billion EV write-down. In a single fiscal year, Honda absorbed nearly $19 billion in combined losses from policy decisions made in Washington. That's not a corporate failure. That's a company getting hit by 2 policy earthquakes simultaneously while standing on solid ground. The industry-wide carnage. Honda wasn't alone. And here's the context that makes the story even more uncomfortable. Honda wasn't the only casualty. The EV write-down massacre of 2025 to 2026 hit every legacy automaker that followed the electrification playbook. Here's the scoreboard of destruction. And every number on this list represents billions that were supposed to build the future. Ford. $17.4 billion gone, GM $7.2 billion gone. Stellantis, $30 billion gone, Honda, $15.7 billion gone, total across just 4 companies. Over $70 billion in EV-related write-downs. Let me put that in a number you can actually feel. $70 billion is enough to buy Honda, Mazda, and Subaru outright and still have billions left for lunch. $70 billion. Gone. Not because EVs don't work, not because consumers don't want them, but because the policy environment that made the economics viable was yanked away faster than any manufacturing operation could respond. Every one of these companies spent years developing EVs in response to government incentives, regulatory pressure, and clear policy signals that electrification was the national priority. Then the priority changed. The factories didn't, the investments didn't. And the write-downs followed like a mathematical certainty that everyone saw coming and nobody could prevent. Stay with me here, because this is the part that makes Honda's story different from the others. Ford was already struggling with quality issues. GM was already wrestling with the Ultium platform rollout. Stellantis was already imploding under the weight of 14 brands and internal dysfunction. Honda was doing fine. Honda was profitable. Honda was making great cars that people wanted to buy. The EV bet was the only thing that went wrong. And it went wrong because of forces entirely outside Honda's control. That distinction matters, because it means the fix is cleaner. The patient isn't sick, the patient took one bad medication. The Honda way. Why this company isn't Nissan or Stellantis. Now here's why I'm not writing this story as an obituary, because Honda in 2026 is fundamentally different from Nissan in 2019 or Stellantis in 2025. And the differences are the reason the market hasn't panicked the way it panicked for those companies. Nissan collapsed because it forgot what it was. They did it to themselves. Stellantis collapsed because 14 brands were eating each other alive. They did it to themselves. Honda collapsed because every authority figure in the room said, "Build electric," and Honda listened. They didn't do this to themselves. The system did it to them. The transition to electric vehicles is still happening, just slower than the industry projected and without the government support that made the economics work. Honda didn't bet on the wrong thing. They bet at the wrong time. And here's the detail that separates Honda from the wreckage. The Ohio factory that was supposed to build those 3 canceled EVs was designed from the beginning with a flexible production line. Honda built the facility to switch between gasoline, hybrid, and electric vehicles depending on market demand. While Ford and GM built dedicated EV-only plants that can't produce anything else, Honda built a factory that can pivot. That single engineering decision, which got almost no press coverage, may be the most important strategic choice any automaker made in the last decade. Honda is also sitting on a motorcycle empire that generates billions in profit annually and has nothing to do with the EV transition. 500 million motorcycles produced as of May 2025, the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer for 66 consecutive years. That business is printing money while the automotive division reorganizes. Nissan doesn't have a motorcycle business. Stellantis doesn't have one either. Honda does. And it's the financial cushion that makes survival possible. Despite the $15.7 billion hit, Honda's underlying business remains profitable when you strip out the one-time EV charges. The motorcycle division alone generates operating margins that most car companies can only dream of. Honda ended 2025 with 58% of its U.S. vehicles using domestic content, up from 45% a year earlier, a hedge against tariffs that's already paying dividends. The company forecasts a return to profitability in fiscal 2027 with a projected net profit of 20 billion yen. Modest, but positive. The company isn't panicking, it's pivoting. The new strategy prioritizes hybrids, the exact technology Honda pioneered with the Insight in 1999, 7 years before the first Tesla Roadster existed. The lesson: when doing everything right still isn't enough. Here's what makes Honda's story different from every other automotive disaster of this decade, and why it matters beyond the car industry. Nissan fell because of hubris, internal warfare, and a CEO who escaped in a speaker box. Stellantis fell because of structural dysfunction, brand bloat, and a company at war with itself. Both stories are about institutional failure, companies that did it to themselves through bad decisions, bad leadership, and bad culture. Honda's story is different. Honda did everything the market, the government, and the industry consensus told them to do. They invested in EVs, they built the factories, they hired the engineers, they followed the playbook, and the playbook changed. Not because Honda was wrong, but because the policy environment shifted faster than any manufacturing operation could adapt. That's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this story. Sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. Sometimes the rules change after you've already built the factory. And sometimes 70 years of unbroken profit can be wiped out not by incompetence or arrogance, but by a government decision made in a building 1,000 miles from your assembly line. Soichiro Honda built his company on a conviction that engineering could solve any problem. For 7 decades, he was right. The CVCC engine solved emissions when the industry said it was impossible. The Civic solved the oil crisis when America was drowning in gas guzzlers. VTEC solved the power versus efficiency trade-off that every engineer accepted as permanent. Honda built its entire identity on solving problems that everyone else had given up on. Think about this for a second. The $15.7 billion write-down is the first problem Honda's engineering can't solve. Because the problem isn't mechanical, it's political. And you can't engineer your way out of a policy change. No VTEC system fixes a tax credit that disappeared overnight. No CVCC breakthrough solves a government that changed its mind. But if any company can absorb a $15.7 billion hit and come back, it's the one founded by a man who started in a wooden shack with a bicycle and a surplus engine and built the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. Honda has survived oil crises, trade wars, recessions, and the complete transformation of global transportation. The question isn't whether Honda can recover. The question is whether the industry that punished them for following the rules will still have rules worth following when they do. 70 years of unbroken profit, a founder who called engine oil perfume, an engine the world said was impossible, 500 million motorcycles, the first Japanese car built in America, and a $15.7 billion write-down that ended the longest winning streak in automotive history. Not because Honda failed, but because the rules changed after the factory was already built. From a wooden shack to a global empire to a $15.7 billion loss. Honda's story isn't about failure, it's about what happens when the most disciplined company in the industry discovers that discipline isn't enough when the game itself changes underneath you. Here's the final contrast that puts everything into perspective. Stellantis lost $26 billion because it was at war with itself. Nissan lost $14 billion because it forgot who it was. Honda lost $15.7 billion because it listened to the world, and the world changed its mind. 3 companies, 3 disasters. Only one of them was caused by doing the right thing at the wrong time. The man who smelled perfume in engine oil would have understood. He crashed a race car in 1936 and nearly lost his eye. He watched his factory get bombed in 1944. He sold the wreckage to Toyota and started over with bicycles and surplus engines in a wooden shack. Soichiro Honda didn't build the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer and one of the most respected car companies on earth by avoiding disasters. He built it by surviving them. The shack is still there, and Honda is still building.